This is the Zemar Podcast. Elite Benefits of America helps small and mid-sized companies with their health insurance programs. And now, your host, Butch Zemar.
Change is everything. Sometimes it's natural progression towards whatever your goals are, your wants, your desires, or whatever you're focused on. And other times it's forced upon us to make those changes, sometimes for the good and sometimes for the bad. I'm going to walk you through a change in the Navy that occurred many years ago, actually probably in the 70s with the Vietnam War. There was an aircraft carrier called the USS Forrestal, and I probably mentioned this story in other podcasts. So on the USS Forrestal, they had probably still the biggest fire outbreak in naval history. It literally killed 100 men. It wiped out the entire firefighting crew. The whole time inside, there was actually a hole on the side of the ship and the flight deck from the missile that went across the flight deck. And all from a forced change that was actually ignored, right? So I'm not trying to get into politics, but you got the late Maverick Senator John McCain. He was a pilot, and he was actually on board the USS Forrestal when this occurred. As he was doing a flight op over heading towards Vietnam, there was a memo issued and went to the entire fleet that talked about this no hot start. So on some of these aircrafts, I'm not aware of it on the modern ones that I worked on, but on the older ones, because they were definitely more old school analog type aircrafts, right? And so less digital, less electronics, just more straight up old school stuff. You could shortcut things, and things worked, and most of the time it was fine. And so there was a shortcut starting this A6 jet engines. And but the problem was, and then this memo was saying that this hot start, I think is what they called it, created shorts or short circuits inside the panels, and it caused problems, right? And most of the time it was all minor, but these things were getting old, and these shorts could be unpredictable. And so they issued a memo saying you just can't do it. Just do it the normal way. You can't do this anymore. We understand pilots want to do it because it's kind of cool. It probably circumvents us some of the time. Like, not that it's an issue whatsoever, but those are big honking motors, and so it worked for them for a long time. So this Maverick John McCain decides, you know what? I'm just going to do it my own way. So he's going to do a hot start, and like he always did. So it definitely created this short circuit, but somehow in the electrical power or electrical panels, whatever, I'm not exactly sure where at inside the cockpit, but it created a short, causing a launching of a missile across the flight deck, and definitely causing a big, huge explosion, as any other missile would. Huge fire starts, men start scrambling. Some were actually at the scene or at the spot where it hit, and they were probably gone at that moment. A lot of the men were pushing jets and machinery over the side of the ship, overboard, to land in the ocean to get them off the flight deck to prevent any spreading of fire. I mean, unfortunately, there's jet fuel all over the entire flight deck. Not only from the explosion, but I'm just saying there's fuel tankers on board, and you got jets with fuel tanks in it, right? So there's definitely some combustible items that can make things worse. So they were trying to push them over the edge. And so I know they went on for hours. I forget the exact amount. I read the book, but it was some long hours they kept fighting. The entire fire crew lost their lives, unfortunately. And so they kept fighting the fire. Other men were stepping in, even helping them out initially, and then those men eventually took over because the firefighting crew got wiped out. And back in the day, there wasn't that many fires, so the crew was actually smaller. And so I don't know how many part of the firefighting crew was part of that, but so eventually they put out the fire with these other men, and They obviously saved the equipment, whatever's left, and the ship. They headed back towards Norfolk. Engineers that evaluated the ship claimed the ship was so damaged that it should have sunk, but somehow through maybe an act of God or the pure will and grit of the Navy sailors that just fought this fire, they were able to save it so it didn't sink. These brave men, just never gave up, right? They just kept pushing and to even some to the point of perishing and save it just to save that ship. So initially, Congress wanted to scrap the whole thing, just take it apart. We'll use scrap metal for other things. But there was leaders in Congress who had fought for that ship, and due to the unselfish efforts of the crew to save that ship. So eventually they awarded money, taxpayer dollars, to fix this ship. And I know there was a memorial on there and everything. So I think it was probably good for the best of naval history in general to honor those men on the same ship that they fought to survive. And so it actually went on and sailed for many years after that. At that point, the Department of the Navy decided that every sailor that is in the fleet needs to go, that is going to be seagoing, needs to go to shipboard firefighting school. This is an absolute requirement. Anytime you have ship duty orders in some capacity. I was not ship's company. In my case, we were tied to the air wing. Every time the air wing went out to sea, we went with it. So since that was a category, everybody was required to go through shipboard firefighting school. Obviously, some people would say, well, this is a positive change, right? Like everybody on board knows how to fight a fire. Different types of fires, electrical fires, you got, chemical fires, the list goes on, right? I'm kind of far removed from a lot of it now. Hopefully, I don't have to fight any more fires. But all this was as a result of losing men trying to fight that fire. Personally, I actually did not go to shipboard firefighting school, and the reason why is because it always conflicted with sea schedule, and the job or billet, whatever you want to call it, I was part of. It seemed that the sea, if you were on sea duty, and sea duty was a higher priority than shipboard firefighting school, but that didn't escape me from any of the training. So I actually probably had better training because while we were at sea, and we were at sea for many, many months, so over the course of the time I was in, so I was in the fleet 36 months, and out of 36 months, I spent 25 of it at sea. And so plenty of time to do some training. So I was trained a little bit by damage control folks. There's people with specific jobs for damage control. That's all they do. They understand metal. They understand plastic. They know how to work with things. That's their job, right? And so then I worked with damage investigators. These are guys that learned and developed skills so that they can go investigate, see what's going on. So when you're in battle stations, let's say in an act of war, everything's shut down, like all the hatches are shut, everything, and they're in a complete this standoff just in case something happens, right? We do that. We were every week we were doing these drills just in case something ever happened. And I think in the history it never really happened. But we're always prepared, mission ready all the time. And so they're trained to be investigators. So as soon as there's a call, missile on the side, fire, water damage, whatever it might be, depending on where they're at in the ship, you had to know your shipboard addresses, if you want to call it. And so they would call it out over what they call the 1MC, which is like the PA system, intercom system. And so they would call it out, and whoever's the nearest investigator would go. So I tagged along with them, investigating and see what the actual thing. And of course, during drills, they made up these things. These were all charted out, just like any sport out there. Coach goes out to practice with a drill practice plan. This is no different. And most of the time, the people in the field, if you want to call it that, not in operations, had no idea what was next. And so we were surprised as we went along. And then other shipboard firefighters, we did don what they call SCBAs. I'm sorry, that's scuba, but it's the breathing apparatuses. So we went through a whole bunch of training for that. We did it in boot camp too, but there's a lot of training that's involved that in case you ever need to go into fire and you need to breathe oxygen. They have these canisters. Back in the day, we had trained with those, but they were going through this huge changed with using tanks. They're upside down tanks. So like the firefighters you see today, we were starting to use those on board the ship, and they probably were for almost 10 years at this point when I was in. But occasionally they still had an old locker, this canister thing where when you put it all on and you don it, it's like you puncture the can in order to get the air to release or something. I don't remember the details specifically, but we went through all that. And like I said, my training probably was a little bit more than what shipboard firefighting school is. I'm not trying to say that I was, overtrained or anything. We all had to go through it. I was not the only one in the situation. I'm just saying that the Navy adapts to circumstances to make sure everybody's qualified to do what their job is. And sometimes they're not, but because sometimes you're just given a weapon and you go, right? But in this case, a lot of the firefighting is done by that. Obviously, a forced change. You just have to learn about all the aspects so you can contribute to the masses to figure out how to fight fires, control floods, whatever it might be. In business, we are forced change too, good and bad, right? It's easy to start a business, even though some people hesitate. It's really easy, right? You have a skill set or you want a skill set. There's so much that you can learn today. I mean, we're talking about, we have YouTube, Brembo, we have books, we have library, we have a whole bunch of stuff to say, okay, how do I get in business of anything I desire, right? Or anything you don't desire too. You could say, well, I know I can make money at this, even though I don't really like it. Some people get in business that way, and hey, whatever works for you. But starting a business isn't hard, but to grow and maintain that business, right, you're forced to change. There's situational changes, there's strategy changes, personnel changes, the list goes on, right? And in a lot of cases out there, these businesses, I wouldn't say a lot, I guess, but you could go out and get some big multi-million-dollar contracts, force in a whole bunch of hires, and then all of a sudden you got a decent-sized company. It doesn't always work like that. So a lot of solopreneurs grow their business one by one all the way to 100 employees, 300 employees, 1,000 employees, right? One by one. It's like a brick, right? And so, but each brick changes the name of the game. And so at some point, you have to keep changing the game. And so there's a lot of books and materials out there like this, but I'll talk about some of the changes that I've experienced in my 20 years of being in business. I'm not saying I'm an expert by any means, but I'll share some of them. Maybe they'll bring some insight. Some don't ever want to change, right? And so they can't figure out why they can't grow. Some just start justifying, right? They just say, you know what? I got enough business. I'm doing all right. I got enough revenue. I got enough staff. I'm doing okay. We're all right. So you start justifying, right? You provide excuses. You move your target, right? So you originally open up business and you got a target to go through. And then as it gets tougher and you lose business here and there, you start readjusting your goals. You're readjusting your targets, and you end up just getting satisfied with whatever's left over. And that's why there's a lot of solopreneurs out there that just never make it, or small shops that just never keep growing. They always justify, right? And in some cases that could be the case, right? You could get to a certain point and you're content and that's your level of capacity, and that's completely acceptable. I'm not putting down anybody that's in that position. I'm just trying to call out the outliers of saying that, oh yeah, I'm fine, but they're really not. They don't know how to pursue, and they don't want to spend the money with consultants to figure out how to get to the next level. And sometimes that's hard too, because consultants do a great job, but it may not always work for your business, and that's where the doubt comes in, right? And so you have to figure out what works in your business and keep forging ahead, right? And sometimes you have to find the right consultant for that. But all this is human nature, right? It's just a rite of passage. I remember my first hire, and I actually had to do it twice. So there was actually, at one point in time, I contracted in this business, partly because Affordable Care Act changed a whole bunch of stuff in our business. Commissions got slashed. We're still trying to get paid what we were 10 years ago, and we're still at a third in a lot of cases, especially for small to mid-sized companies, depending on what your marker is for that. But the larger companies, when you get into hundreds of thousands of employees, that hasn't really changed. I mean, it changed some, but not percentage-wise the same as it has for, especially for any groups under 250 employees, and especially under 100. Huge impact. So I've had to contract, readjust. I've actually we could probably create a whole nother podcast on some of those challenges where I sold, then bought, and then bought again and bought more and grew the business in the meantime. And so we could certainly create another podcast on some of those ups and downs because there was definitely some contraction going on. But I expanded twice, right? So I expanded leading into the Affordable Care Act, contracted, came out of everything that I call them tuition payments. I had to go through a bunch of tuition payments and lesson learns, and then I'm expanding again, right? So we're forced to hire or make a decision to hire help. Otherwise, we're running at this high speed, and we're trying to figure out how to do it, right? And so I kind of relate this moment to kind of like accelerator in a car, right? We got these revolutions per minute or RPMs. And most people don't drive stick shift, and most don't understand the gears in a car. But, as you're revving up, it shifts gears, right? So, and in theory, like when you rev up your current car, whether it's automatic or stick shift, and I'm making up these numbers, I'm not a mechanic, but, maybe 1,500 RPMs. If you gun it, it might be 2,000 RPMs. Where then all of a sudden you have this nice smooth transmission in the automatic transmissions to shift the second gear. You may not even know it even happened, right? And that's what the goal is in business, to kind of shift gears without anybody ever noticing it in the car, right? So in business, you keep, a lot of times you keep those RPMs high, right? And so in some cases, you could actually rev them up and you stay at 10,000 RPMs all the time, right? And then at times, the RPMs are so high that you're surprised your motor didn't blow up. The same thing with your business. Your business motor hasn't blown up yet, but somehow you still keep going, right? Eventually it's going to pop at some point, but you have to make a decision, right? You can contract, get those RPMs lower to a more comfortable level, and a lot of people do this, right? It makes it justifiable, right? Your health is at risk, your family's at risk, a whole bunch of things. You make justifiable reasons to move back the other way. Or you get more help, right? You hire you hire and try to get employees to stick around and train them and spend that time and help you grow, right? Multiply your efforts. Or you could focus on higher revenue accounts. And we'll go through a bunch of this. But from my experience, most businesses, we've probably dealt with thousands of businesses over the years in some capacity, either clients, prospects, or friends and family in low places in business, right? Almost all of them just kind of stay at the 10,000 RPMs, right? They just kind of get there, and they're always just under blowing their motor all the time, right? And in fact, in some cases, they're kind of surprised it hasn't, and they get all the way to retirement and they made it. But other times, it's not so fortunate. Or they just end up contracting to a more comfortable level, right? Then they justify it, they make these reasons, right? All this stuff that they just say, no, I'm comfortable. And then there's a small amount of businesses that force themselves to hire help to get you to the next level, right? And this is a tough burden thing, right? And in some cases, I call this, forced affordability, right? All of a sudden you get to a position where you have to do it. You don't have a choice either if you want to keep growing. So you force yourself, you find somebody that may be a fit, and hopefully it just works out because it's your first hire. And so as long as both the employee and the owner or partner or whoever's running the company, they focus on the right activities, and not just busy work, get the busy work out of there, create efficiencies, eliminate the waste, delete or delegate as much as you can, or get rid of it. You will grow and pay for that staff. It will happen, right? As long as you focus on the right stuff. We've had people in that are clients of ours, they would hire that next hire, and then they get them caught up in all this busy work because they thought it was important. And they end up having to let them go within a relatively short period of time. That's why a lot of these small micro groups for health insurance never last too long, because either the company folds or they were doing it because they needed it for the employee, and now the employee's gone. It's just this, rotating door just keeps moving, and there's always good intentions along the way. But you'll always keep running into this at every level of your business, right? And so you just start hiring every time you get to the point where you're at a breaking point, you hire somebody else and focus on the right activities, it all works out. But at some point, a lot of businesses get to the point where they just kind of contract and stay at whatever level they decide to stay at. So a lot of insurance agencies throughout the entire country, all the smaller ones, they do get to a certain point where they get 1 staff, maybe 2 staff, and maybe even get to 3, but then they never grow anymore. That's it. Some of it's a life cycle thing, and they're at the tail end of their career by the time that occurs. In other cases, they just can't figure out because they don't have enough leverage to move to that next level. They just can't figure it out. And so a lot of them end up contracting and then either staying right where they're at or eliminating an employee and just kind of cruise control it. Then there's increase in your revenue per account. This takes a lot of discipline, and it's very hard for most people. And it's super rare that a business actually does this without some outside resources and help, right? So if you're dependent on that revenue, it's very hard to eliminate the bottom half. If you're not, like if you got a working spouse at home that generates income for the house, it makes it a lot easier. So we've seen businesses that thrive that way, where they eliminate the bottom part of their revenue and focus on the higher value or higher revenue accounts, and it works out because they have leverage. They have somebody else to back them up, or a resource or something that helps generate leads in that area, all kinds of stuff, right? So, but it's hard to do it, very hard to do it standing still where you're at. But at the same time, they have to offload those lower accounts, and that's key here. You can't grow the business, say I'm going to focus on bigger accounts, but then you're still managing these guys that got you in the business, or girls, or your accounts that got you in the business to begin with. You're impartial because they helped you when they believed in you when you had nothing, and now you have something, and now you have to make some hard decisions, right? Unless you're able to hire somebody to manage them, and then at least you're still available to them. Sometimes that's a hard process to walk through. But by focusing on the larger revenue and offloading the smaller accounts in some capacity is a longer process. Again, especially when you depend on that revenue, because you need to survive. You need to pay, obviously, your taxes, your groceries, your overhead. I mean, all kinds of stuff you have to make sure. But it takes a lot of discipline to make it work, to get to the higher value accounts. It's not just easy as making a decision. In some cases it is, right? You could say, I'm just going to draw a line in the sand. And I've done that plenty of times, draw a line in the sand, and I'm just going to move up. And in our practice, because we kept growing and delegating some of the lower revenue accounts, that it's kind of worked out that as we moved up, the smaller accounts just got a lot easier, more efficient. And we're still working on ways to make it more efficient. It's just going to cost a lot more money, but it could change our business model, and then maybe we could duplicate it for other agencies throughout the entire country. And so it's made that process so much easier because of that. And so that can occur in your business as well. Sometimes your prospect list, what you got in the pipeline, doesn't match your new target. And that takes some time. You got to figure out where your new target is, how you're going to go after it. Any type of resources to help aid you, such as referral partners or lead generation sources that have those targets. And sometimes you don't have the resources yet. Like in our industry, if you're going to move upstream, you're going to have resources, right? You're going to have HR documentation or access for your staff. I mean, sure, they could outsource some of it, but you still need the resource for them. It may not be your expertise, but you need to have it available. You need online technology, not only internally with CRMs and managing employees for your clients, but also the technology with onboard. The same goes with any other industry. As you move up in higher value, there's going to be more needs and wants that are going to be there. Sometimes with higher revenue accounts, they're paying more for it, so therefore they expect more. And so depending on what classification or business you're in, there's a lot of things that you might have to scale up to, and then you have another investment to make other than just an employee, and this is very, very hard. But this is when you have to determine when you have to make these change, how you're going to make the change, and execute, right? And maintain that target where you're headed to, right? Time is your worst enemy. The more time you take for any of these changes, the more you bleed to death, literally, right? And so if you take too much time, you're never going to make it. It's like kind of trying to take off on a runway as an airplane. And if you don't go fast enough, you're not going to make it up in the air. And obviously, death is not an option, right? So you need to make some very important decisions, and you need to be disciplined to stick to it. You just have to keep moving in order to do it. And when and even when you're ready to just give up, right? You fought the good fight and you're like, this isn't working, right? That's usually when you're getting close to turning that corner, right? There's that story, it's in many books, whether or not it's true, I don't know, but back in the gold rush, heading out west, there was a guy that hired some people, bought equipment, and started digging for gold, and he digged for years and never found gold. And finally, he decided to throw in the hat. He sold the stuff pretty much for scrap prices, and the guy that ended up buying it for scraps, he's like, you know what? The equipment's still here. Maybe I'll just start digging. And he dug. He was 3 feet from the gold, right? And so it's obviously a true story. I've experienced it many times. I've also been down a rabbit hole that never comes to an end, and you have to change gears, and that's forcing you to change again. But I'm telling you, sometimes when you keep pushing along and you know your target's there and you keep focused on the right productive activities, eventually something's going to happen for sure in a positive light. But having all the business doesn't help either, right? So you just say, I'll just take it all, complete value. You focus on large accounts, small accounts. It doesn't really help the practice grow. It ends up being like a fire hose effect, and then you're all over the map, and it doesn't help. Yeah, and some people just step on the accelerator, get the high volume, get the large business, get the small one that hires you grow, right? And you're always going to rev at your engine all the time. It becomes very difficult when you try to be jack of all trades. Why? Because the reality is you'll miss opportunities along the way, right? For various reasons. It won't be necessarily because you're accelerating so fast. I mean, there's a little bit of that where you just move too fast for people and they just don't want to stick around for you because you're just too fast. And other times you just missed the opportunity to call them back, right? And then they ignore you and they made other decisions. It could be many other reasons, right? It's not one specifically. It's just a whole bunch of stuff because, again, it's like a fire hose effect. There's too much going on, and your accounts pick up on that, or they just don't hear from you because too much time has passed. The other thing is you're always playing catch up, right? And this is just because of the high volume. You're always trying to work. So behind the scenes, you're always trying to work harder, better, faster. And you always eventually probably end up making all things meet. You retain your clients and everything, but it's a pure train wreck. In fact, you completely derail on the inside, but somehow you always pull back. It happens all the time in business. I've seen it, experienced it, all kinds of stuff. You hardly have any time to stop and refuel because you're always got your foot on the gas pedal. You just keep going, you keep going, you keep going, and eventually it's going to catch up to you. So all these things are just forced change opportunities, right? And so you always have to keep changing and evolving. Otherwise, the things you do when you're a solopreneur, small practice, first $1 million, second $1 million, $10 million, the game keeps changing. You have to keep adapting. What you did in the beginning won't work when you're later. What got you here won't get you there. And there's a book out there. I wasn't too pleased on some of the content, but the idea behind it is definitely true. What's going to get you to the next stop is not going to be what got you here. And if you don't make a change or make involvement, you're going to die. Your business is going to die, right? Or your health is going to take a major impact, your marriage, your family, whatever it might be, right? You have to make changes. And so, and there's books that talk about this where some people end up in the hospital because they worked too hard and now they're forced to make a change. They don't have any other choice. But make the force change for the good, right? Just keep moving. You got to be disciplined, right? You got to focus on the targets, right? The problem a lot of businesses do is they change their targets when it gets too tough. And of course, that's a Grant Cardone thing, but it is so true, right? So you reduce the targets because of the difficulty of the matter. And that's the problem is now you create mediocrity, right? You create a lower level of your expectations because there's a high chance that you're probably under target. You just don't know until you get there. And you have to keep pushing, and you're probably going to expand that target to a much higher one that you never imagined that you could. You'll make it if you don't quit, right? And if you keep focused on the right things and the right targets for your business, you'll eventually get to where you're going.